If you want to see amazing and exciting duels, informative and entertaining top 10 lists, and everything else that's just great about the game of Yu-Gi-Oh, you gotta watch the Capital G Show. Shout outs to my homeboy Dante. Hey. What's up YouTube, Capital G here. We're talking Lavalval Chain in this video and asking, what do you think the possibility of this card actually getting banned? I watched Simo's video where he was going around and he was asking at the nationals that happened last week. He was asking a lot of players if they could change one thing on the ban list, what would it be? And I actually heard a few people say Lavalval Chain banned, and Spoopy from the Card Guys, he made a very good point because he was one of the players who wanted Lavalval Chain banned. He said that everything that this card was used for is essentially degenerate and not healthy for the game. And I really thought about it. I hearkened back to the decks and the plays that Lavalval Chain has been most associated with, and I think that when I really thought about it, I think like he actually swayed me to his side, where I think Lavalval Chain is one of those cards where limiting it really doesn't do a lot, because a lot of times in these decks you only have to use the effect or you only need one Lavalval Chain to serve its purpose, especially if the Lavalval Chain can trigger twice. But when I thought about these decks, I was thinking of really powerful decks that have been known for one or two plays with this card. In fact, it's like the card only serves a purpose of making one or two plays. And if you just looked at Lavalval Chain on paper, like you didn't even think about what it has done in the history of Yu-Gi-Oh, and you just looked at the card itself, wouldn't it seem at least limit worthy? Like if you read the first effect, it's essentially you send one card to the graveyard. Okay, that's basically Foolish Burial. Now whether you think Foolish Burial should be limited or not, that is a limited card. And in fact, Lavalval Chain's even better than Foolish Burial, because Lavalval Chain does not have the restriction of only sending monsters to the graveyard. There are rare situations where you might actually want to throw a spell or trap in the graveyard. I can't really think of any traps you'd want to throw in the graveyard. Maybe a Breakthrough Skill or something like that. That could be a possibility. But you could throw a spell in the graveyard, like a Void Seer. You could throw a Galaxy Cyclone in there. If you were playing Necros and you were desperate and you just didn't have any ritual spells, you could throw a ritual spell in there and then maybe get another one from your hand. I've actually done this play in Infernoids where I've thrown Cursed Bamboo Sword in the graveyard and actually got like the Golden Bamboo Sword for free out of my deck and drawn a couple of cards that way. So that first effect is kind of linked to a card that's already limited. And then if you think of the second effect, I mean, this one has been exploited to hell and back too. If you remember Hat, the deck that took last year's Nationals, in fact, it was 6 out of the top 8 were actually Hat decks. This deck was probably the first deck to really utilize the second effect of Lavalval Chain really, really well. If you remember watching Corey McDuffie and Dion Eckeridge, like in their matches and you know, like top 8 through the finals and whatnot, every single time that they summon Lavalval Chain, they would always stack a Trap Tricks Dianara to the top of their deck, because essentially they could summon the Murmillo back, they could pop a back row, and then at the same time just set up for another Exceed play. And you'll commonly see the second effect, the stack effect, used with Necros now after they've already dumped the gem. You commonly see them, you know, put a Manju or a Senju on top of their deck and pretty much be like they're given the best card that they could want for the next turn. I guess you could put a Brio on top of your deck, but I wouldn't. Like, I've never really seen it done. Manju and Senju just kind of serve the same purpose, but they also set up for Exceed plays. And then you just already know how great the first effect has been throughout Yu-Gi-Oh! I mean, Infernoids, or Infernity, they were a deck where they were largely made by, you know, Lavalval Chain plus Soul Charge at 3, where you would see commonly Infernities going to 2 copies of Lavalval Chain in a turn, just constantly dumping, you know, like Street Patrols in the graveyard, dumping Archfiend so that they could Soul Charge them back and just kind of explode, and then the Gen Lock goes without saying. And there's also the Blue-Blooded Oni FTK, which that is like, it requires you know, like multiple copies of Lavalval Chain and whatnot. So I want to know what you guys think about this card. Do you think it is a card that could potentially be banned, not just because of its history in Yu-Gi-Oh, and because most of the time people summon it, it's only for a couple of plays, and sometimes the best deck of the format, Hat, Necros, Infernity, but because of the power of the card just on face value, the fact that it is Foolish Burial built into a card, but even better, and the stack effect, which has been exploited. And I feel like a lot of people would bring up Daigusto Emerald. I always feel like these two cards are kind of tied at the hip and say, well, Cap, what about Daigusto Emerald? You know, it's kind of like the same deal where Daigusto Emerald's first effect is like a mini Pot of Avarice. The difference between Daigusto Emerald and something like Lavalval Chain, and I feel like this isn't the most random comparison. Some people are like, this is a random comparison. I feel like, first off, the power isn't quite Pot of Avarice, so maybe a restriction probably isn't necessary for Daigusto Emerald. But also with Daigusto Emerald, you actually see people change up the plays. Like, people don't always select the same 3 monsters every single time that they use it. There is variations. And then also the second effect of Daigusto Emerald has, to my knowledge, never been exploited. The effect of being able to summon a non-effect monster, like, I've never really seen anybody use that in like a high tier deck. I don't think that we're gonna see it used anytime soon. It eventually will probably happen, but the second effect really hasn't been utilized at all competitively. With Lavalval Chain, both effects have been vastly exploited throughout this game's history, or at least since the card has been released. And it just begs the question, do you think there is a chance that Lavalval Chain can be banned? Because I really didn't think about this card at all. It wasn't even on my short list. But after thinking about it, I was like, yeah, that makes a really good point. If Lavalval Chain was banned, would people even still play the Genlock in Necroz? Like, I don't even know if they would play that. If Lavalval Chain was banned, pretty sure Archfiend could probably go back to like 3 or something, because then Greffer, Foolish Burial, and cards like Armageddon Knight would be your only ways of getting this to the graveyard, but you wouldn't be able to just full YOLO it and get street patrols and stuff like that from the deck. So just a topic for thought right before the ban list. Let me know what you guys think. Thank you for watching, as always. Subscribing makes life happy.